Have you ever wondered what really happened behind the scenes of early Christianity? There are stories they told us, but what about those they hid? Among forgotten and marginalized texts, the Gospel of Philip stands out as one of the most controversial and disturbing. It challenges not only what we know about Jesus, but also the central role of Mary Magdalene. A kiss, a seemingly simple gesture, becomes the center of a mystery that the church preferred to leave aside for centuries. Think for a moment. What if Mary Magdalene was much more than a faithful follower? What if she represented the lost balance between masculine and feminine in spirituality? In the Gospel of Philip, the description of his relationship with Jesus transcends traditional notions, suggesting a connection that can shake dogmatic foundations and offer a new perspective on their mission. Could this kiss, after all, be an act of love, a transmission of spiritual power, or something that defies any conventional explanation? Today, we will unravel these layers of symbolism, history, and censorship. Prepare to delve into a text that was considered too dangerous to be included in the official Gospels, but powerful enough to survive time. What was at stake was more than a simple story. It was control of a narrative, a forbidden knowledge that still echoes in the pages of this Gospel. Stay with us and discover how this gesture can change your view of what is truly sacred. In the midst of the vast desert of religious information, the Gospel of Philip emerges as a piece that the church preferred to hide under the sands of time. Discovered in Nag Hammadi in 1945, he not only upsets the traditional narrative of Christianity, but also challenges doctrinal pillars with his revolutionary vision. Written in the 3rd century in a Gnostic context, the text brings to light a spirituality that does not depend on institutional intermediation. No wonder he was quickly labeled a heretic. After all, who would dare question the centrality of the male hierarchy? If the Gospel of Philip had been just another piece of religious literature, it wouldn't have caused such a stir. But his insistence on highlighting female figures, such as Mary Magdalene, and questioning doctrines such as Jesus' celibacy, made him a danger to centralized power. Imagine a time when the idea of gender equality within spirituality sounded like a cry for revolution. This is exactly what this text did, poking at the wounds of religious patriarchy with a silent ferocity. Furthermore, the Gospel of Philip is much more than a provocation. It is an invitation to rethink everything. By asserting that self-knowledge is the key to spiritual enlightenment, he breaks dependence on clergy and returns power to the people. This message, at the time, was not just inconvenient. It was dangerous, a direct threat to the idea that the church was the only way to God. And of course, anything that broke that illusion needed to be censored. The historical context in which the text was written cannot be ignored. During the 3rd century, Christianity was still shaping itself, struggling to position itself as a unified force. The inclusion of Gnostic ideas, which celebrated an independent spirituality, threatened the consolidation of this power. The Gospel of Philip, with its emphasis on alternative interpretations, was a thorn in the side of those who wanted a church with absolute control. But what really makes this text fascinating is its audacity. He doesn't just challenge, he exposes. It reveals a face of Christianity that has been carefully erased, one that celebrated direct connection with the divine, free from intermediaries. This subversive spirit is what continues to intrigue him to this day. And how could it not be so? After all, like any excluded and persecuted narrative, it carries within it the irresistible flavor of the forbiddens. Few texts carry as much controversy as the Gospel of Philip in describing Mary Magdalene as Jesus' companion. The choice of the word companion, koinonos in Greek, suggests something beyond friendship or spiritual collegiality. This expression carries a charge of intimacy that has made the church tremble for centuries. After all, how can we reconcile a central figure of Christianity with the possibility of such a close partnership? Whether spiritual or conjugal, more than a question of terminology, This passage questions the image of Jesus as a being completely devoid of deep human relationships. This description also challenges an essentially asexual view of Jesus promoted by the institutional church. If Jesus and Mary Magdalene shared something as close as a spiritual or marital union, it would completely reconfigure the dynamics of early Christianity. Rather than an isolated male figure at the top of a divine hierarchy, he would become an example of balance between the masculine and feminine. It would be no surprise that such an idea needed to be silenced. It threatened the foundations of a system built on the exclusion of the feminine. Interestingly, the text does not seek to justify this relationship. He simply presents it as a fact, something that everyone around Jesus knew and accepted, at least to some degree. The naturalness with which Jesus' companion is mentioned in the Gospel of Philip reveals how much the original narrative may have changed over time. After all, who decides what is appropriate or not in relation to the life of Jesus? This question echoes in every fragment that is excluded or deliberately pursued. The implications of this relationship go beyond the romantic aspect. It suggests a dynamic of partnership and exchange, something deeply human. Mary Magdalene, as a companion, would not just be a disciple in the background, but someone who shares the same knowledge and purpose. This type of equality was a mirror that the church could not allow its faithful to see. After all, if Mary could be Jesus' equal in spiritual understanding, who else could claim that position? Perhaps this is why the term companion is so powerful. It transcends the limitations imposed by translations and censorship over the centuries. No matter how much they try to dilute it, it continues to cast doubt and provoke reflection. And, deep down, this is the purpose of texts like the Gospel of Philip, to challenge the comfortable, the established and the correct, and to open the way for what has been deliberately excluded from the official narrative. The idea that Jesus frequently kissed Mary Magdalene, mentioned in the Gospel of Philip, is one of the most provocative and enigmatic passages in the text. In a partially damaged passage, the Gospel describes that the Savior loved Mary more than all the disciples and kissed her often on the mouth. This detail, in addition to suggesting an unusual proximity, raised speculation about the meaning of this gesture. Was it an act of personal intimacy, or a metaphor for the transfer of spiritual knowledge, as some Gnostic traditions suggest? In the Gnostic view, the kiss often symbolizes the passing of divine wisdom from a master to a disciple. It is not just a physical act, but a representation of the most profound exchange possible, spiritual awakening. In this context, Mary Magdalene would have received a higher understanding from Jesus, becoming the repository of teachings that the other disciples did not have the capacity or openness to receive. This scenario is highly uncomfortable for the Church's official narrative, which has always sought to portray male apostles as pillars of faith. On the other hand, the gesture can also be interpreted as a reflection of a more human and effective relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. The frequency of kissing mentioned in the text suggests that this was not a sporadic interaction, but something natural and regular. Such proximity raises questions about the nature of their relationship and the possible censorship of elements that humanize Jesus. The early church, concerned with constructing an idealized and distant divine figure, would have strong reasons to exclude passages that highlighted his humanity. This tension between physical intimacy and spiritual transmission is one of the greatest enigmas left by the Gospel of Philip. Whatever the interpretation, both point to an uncomfortable truth. Mary Magdalene was more than just a follower. She was, in some way, central in Jesus' circle, whether as an emotional partner or as a recipient of divine wisdom. This position challenges traditions that have relegated her to a secondary figure, or even the repentant sinner popularized for centuries. In the end, Jesus' kiss of Mary Magdalene is not just a provocative detail, but a symbol of everything that has been deliberately excluded and persecuted in the history of Christianity. It forces us to reconsider established narratives and question what else may have been suppressed over the centuries. This reflection is exactly the kind of discomfort that the Church has tried to avoid, but which continues to fascinate those who seek occult knowledge. The exclusion of the Gospel of Philip from the official biblical canon was not a random decision. His message directly challenged the structure that the early Church sought to consolidate in the 4th century. The text not only presents Mary Magdalene in a prominent position, but also promotes a spirituality based on direct knowledge, something that weakens the need for an ecclesiastical hierarchy. At a time when Christianity was becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire, texts that decentralized power and challenged traditional narratives had no place. Furthermore, the Gospel of Philip offers a vision of Christianity deeply influenced by Gnosticism, a spiritual current that values the individual's search for divine truth. This approach did not fit with the growing institutionalization of the Christian faith, which depended on fixed dogmas and clerical authority to maintain unity. Allowing a text like Philip's to be widely accepted would jeopardize the basis of this hierarchical structure, encouraging the faithful to seek the truth on their own, without the mediation of the clergy. The content of the gospel was also considered dangerous for its emphasis on the divine feminine. The figure of Mary Magdalene as Jesus' companion and the representation of the union between the masculine and feminine as essential for spirituality directly challenged the patriarchal doctrine of the Church. By suppressing texts like this, ecclesiastical leadership ensured that the role of women in the Christian narrative remained marginalized, consolidating a male-dominated structure. The exclusion of the Gospel of Philip also reflects a larger strategy of narrative control. During the councils of Nicaea and subsequent ones, the Church carefully selected texts the best to support in its agenda of centralization of power and alignment with the Roman Empire. Any gospel that promoted alternative ideas or presented Jesus in a light different from that shaped by official tradition was quickly labeled heretical and expunged from recognized scripture. However, the rediscovery of the Gospel of Philip in Nag Hammadi in 1945 rekindled curiosity about early Christianity and the diversity of views that existed before the consolidation of orthodoxy. Through its writings, the Gospel not only challenges the official narrative, but also invites us to reconsider the foundations of our understanding of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and the role of hidden knowledge in the spiritual path. Mary Magdalene, often portrayed as a secondary figure in the canonical Gospels, takes on a central role in the Gospel of Philip. In this text, she is described as someone who walks alongside Jesus and understands the deepest mysteries of his teachings. The phrase, "There are three who always walk with the Lord: Mary, his mother, your sister, and Mary Magdalene, who's called his companion," not only places her in a prominent position, but suggests a unique spiritual connection with the Master. This representation contrasts sharply with the image of the repentant sinner popularized by the Church. This marginalization of Mary Magdalene reflects a deliberate effort by the early Church to consolidate a patriarchal narrative, promoting a woman as spiritual leader and potential confidant of Jesus would represent a threat to the male-dominated hierarchical model that has become the basis of the ecclesiastical institution. Mary Magdalene, with her access to profound knowledge and her central role in Jesus' circle, symbolized a spirituality that transcended gender barriers, something that the institutionalized Church was not willing to accept. In the Gospel of Philip, Mary Magdalene is not just a follower. She is a figure with unique understanding, capable of capturing what other disciples could not. This view challenges the official narrative, which has consistently favored male apostles as the pillars of the Christian faith. Mary, because of her closeness to Jesus, could have been seen as a threat to the role of Peter and other male leaders in the formation of the Church. The deliberate exclusion of Mary Magdalene as a spiritual leader reflects the struggle for control in early Christianity. The Church sought to centralize power in male figures, erasing or minimizing women's contributions to the propagation of the faith. Texts such as the Gospel of Philip, which feature Mary Magdalene in an elevated position, were censored, persecuted, and labeled heretical to ensure these narratives did not gain traction. With the rediscovery of texts such as the Gospel of Philip, the opportunity arises to reevaluate the role of Mary Magdalene in Christianity. Is official history as we know it just a distorted version of reality? The figure of Mary Magdalene as a spiritual leader continues to inspire debate and reflection, challenging us to question the foundations of our understanding of early Christianity. The concept of hieros gamos, or sacred marriage, described in the Gospel of Philip, brings to light an intriguing and deeply spiritual insight into the union between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. In this text, marriage is presented as a metaphor for the fusion of the sacred masculine and feminine, a representation of divine harmony that transcends the material plane. The phrase marriage union is a great mystery because it symbolizes the union of the sacred, suggests that this idea is not just symbolic, but fundamental for understanding the spiritual plan preached by Jesus. The possibility that Jesus and Mary Magdalene participated in a hieros gamos rite is, to say the least, provocative. It is not just a physical or emotional union, but a spiritual bond that exemplifies the integration of the human with the divine. This concept challenges the image of Jesus as a distant and celibate religious leader, promoting a more accessible and human view of his role as a spiritual master. However, this idea was unacceptable to the institutional church. Jesus' celibacy was promoted as an ideal model of purity, as opposed to the notion of conjugal or spiritual union with Mary Magdalene. By suppressing any mention of such an intimate relationship, the church not only reinforced the idea of Jesus as an unattainable figure, but also weakened the role of the divine feminine in Christian spirituality. The concept of hieros gamos also suggests a deep connection to older spiritual traditions, which often celebrated the sacred union between masculine and feminine principles as a reflection of the cosmic order. The inclusion of this concept in the Gospel of Philip may indicate continuity with these traditions, highlighting the idea that Jesus was offering a more universal spiritual path than that propagated by later religious structures. The exclusion of this vision of divine union demonstrates how the church sought to shape the narrative of Christianity to suit its own institutional priorities. However, the rediscovery of the Gospel of Philip allows us to question this narrative and explore the possibility that Jesus and Mary Magdalene together embodied a profound spiritual teaching that transcends the limits of religious dogma. The Gospel of Philip presents a striking contrast with canonical texts by emphasizing the central role of women in the spiritual quest. One of the most impactful statements in the text is, "God is mother and father." This vision breaks with the patriarchal doctrine of the Church, which over the centuries has prioritized an exclusively masculine narrative over the divine. The elevation of the sacred feminine to the same level as the masculine, as proposed in this gospel, was censored to support a hierarchical and patriarchal power structure. The marginalization of female spirituality was a deliberate move to consolidate male dominance in the Church. Texts like the Gospel of Philip that celebrate the divine feminine were excluded from the canon, labeled as heretical and persecuted. The representation of figures like Mary Magdalene as spiritual leaders and bearers of divine knowledge was a direct threat to the institutional narrative, which relied on women's subservience within the ecclesiastical structure. By giving protagonism to women, the Gospel of Philip not only challenges the patriarchal structure, but also reinterprets the very essence of the Christian faith by declaring that the feminine and masculine are both necessary to the divine. The text suggests that true spirituality lies in the integration and balance between these energies. This view promotes an inclusive and universal understanding of faith, which contrasts sharply with traditional teachings that restrict women's role to obedience and silence. The suppression of the sacred feminine is an issue that transcends Christianity. Other ancient spiritual traditions, such as the Egyptian and Babylonian, also highlighted the balance between the masculine and feminine in their conception of the divine. The rejection of this idea in institutional Christianity reflects an effort to centralize power and eliminate elements that could encourage a more egalitarian view of spirituality. With the rediscovery of the Gospel of Philip and other apocryphal texts, it becomes possible to revisit the importance of the divine feminine in the history of Christianity. These works not only challenge the official narrative, but also offer an opportunity to rebalance spiritual understanding and recognize the contributions of women in shaping the Christian faith. The Gospel of Philip reflects a Gnostic view of Christianity, which prioritizes self-knowledge and individual enlightenment over dogmas imposed by religious institutions. The phrase, "Whoever obtains the knowledge of the truth will be set free," encapsulates this deeply spiritual approach, which directly contrasts with the centralized control promoted by the Church. The emphasis on hidden knowledge makes the text an obvious threat to institutional hegemony. Gnosticism rejected the need for intermediaries between the human being and the divine. This decentralized spirituality challenged the role of the clergy, who depended on obedience and fear to maintain their authority. It is no surprise that Gnostic texts, such as the Gospel of Philip, were labeled heretical and excluded from the biblical canon. The persecution of these ideas demonstrates the systematic attempt to silence an alternative vision of early Christianity. The suppression of Gnosticism was not only a theological issue, but also a political one. Church leaders understood that a Christianity that empowered individuals would be less susceptible to institutional control. Therefore, Gnostic doctrines, which valued direct experience and internal knowledge, were censored in favor of a more uniform and easily manipulated narrative. Gnosticism also represented a threat because it united elements of other spiritual traditions, such as Hermeticism and Eastern mysticism, creating a syncretic vision of Christianity. This integration challenged the exclusivity that the Church sought to establish, especially in a period of political expansion and consolidation. By eliminating these influences, the Church was able to construct a Christian identity that was distinct and aligned with its interests. Today, the rediscovery of Gnostic texts allows a reflection on the Christianity that could have been. They present a spirituality that privileges free thought and self-knowledge rather than blind conformity. This alternative vision, once pursued, resurfaces as an invitation to reconsider the foundations of faith and the narratives that shaped it. Contrary to the traditional image of Mary Magdalene as a repentant sinner, the Gospel of Philip portrays her as a central figure in Jesus' teachings. The text states that she understood the deepest mysteries, suggesting that her role went beyond that of an ordinary follower. This view elevates Mary Magdalene to the status of spiritual leader, a position that the institutional church has preferred to ignore or distort to maintain its patriarchal narrative. The transformation of Mary Magdalene into a figure of little importance was a deliberate strategy to divert attention from her closeness to Jesus and her influence. Texts such as the Gospel of Philip show that she was a confidant, and perhaps the only one who fully understood the most advanced teachings of Christ. Such prominence directly challenged male leadership and threatened a hierarchy that was consolidated in early Christianity. By highlighting Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Philip also suggests that women played significant roles in early Christianity, a fact often forgotten or censored. This idea contradicts centuries of doctrine that have relegated women to secondary, subservient roles. In doing so, the text not only rewrites history, but also inspires contemporary movements that seek to restore balance in Christian spirituality. The central question is, why did the Church need to minimize the importance of Mary Magdalene? The answer may lie in the need to consolidate exclusively male leadership. By redefining Mary as sinner rather than companion or leader, the Church was able to shape a narrative that reinforced its patriarchal structure and excluded women from the sphere of spiritual power. The rediscovery of the Gospel of Philip is an opportunity to reconsider Mary Magdalene's role in the formation of Christianity. She is not only a historical figure, but also a symbol of how spiritual truth can be censored and distorted to suit powerful interests. And as we look at these questions, new perspectives emerge, inviting us to explore the next fascinating aspect of this narrative. The Gospel of Philip contains a thought-provoking passage that mentions the disciples' discomfort regarding the closeness between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. The phrase, "The disciples said, 'Why do you love her more than all of us?' suggests a latent tension between Mary and the apostles, especially Peter. This jealousy was not just emotional, but indicated a struggle for influence and spiritual leadership. The relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, as described in this gospel, breaks with the traditional hierarchical structure. While the apostles sought to assert their authority, Mary was highlighted as the recipient of privileged teachings. This posed a direct threat to Peter's role as a recognized leader, creating an implicit conflict that was largely ignored in the canonical Gospels. This episode sheds light on the internal dynamics of Jesus' first followers. By placing Mary Magdalene in a prominent position, the Gospel of Philip challenges the patriarchal narratives that have been solidified by the Church. The exclusion of this text from the official canon was therefore a way of preserving male authority and silencing alternative voices, especially female, that could question this structure. The jealousy of the apostles, particularly Peter, reflects not only a personal rivalry but also an ideological struggle. Mary Magdalene's closeness to Jesus symbolized an openness to female leadership and a more inclusive spirituality, something the early church tried to avoid. This dispute is a powerful reminder of how power relations have shaped Christianity since its earliest days. When considering the apostles' reaction, we realize that the Gospel of Philip exposes a hidden facet of Christian history. This internal tension between Peter and Mary Magdalene is not just a personal drama, but a representation of the forces that shaped institutional Christianity. And as you explore deeper, new truths emerge, setting the stage for the next aspect of this intriguing narrative. In the Gospel of Philip, Mary Magdalene is called the companion of Jesus, using the Greek word koinonos, which can be translated as partner or associate. This term carries a depth that goes beyond simple personal relationships. It suggests a relationship of intimate collaboration, both spiritual and intellectual, a connection that made it indispensable in Jesus' mission. The choice of the term koinonos does not seem casual. It indicates that Mary was not just a passive follower, but an active and central figure in the dissemination of Christ's teachings. This closeness was not simply emotional, but reflected a partnership that transcended the conventions of the time, challenging the male hierarchy that dominated religious leaders. This companion designation is significant because it positions Mary Magdalene as a figure of equality, someone who walked side by side with Jesus. This directly contradicts traditional narratives that portray Jesus as isolated in his divine mission. The implicit message here is that the role of women in early Christianity was more central than canonical versions suggest. For the early church, accepting Mary Magdalene as koinonos would mean challenging the entire patriarchal paradigm on which ecclesiastical authority was built. Ignoring or distorting the meaning of this term was a way of protecting the power structure, removing women from leadership roles and preserving male dominance in the religious organization. The title companion not only elevates Mary Magdalene, but also invites us to reevaluate how Christianity was shaped. If this relationship was as central as the Gospel of Philip suggests, what else was suppressed to protect the official narrative? This questioning leads us to discover how spirituality can be reconstructed based on hidden truths. The rediscovery of the Gospel of Philip represents a call to re-examine the role of the feminine in Christianity. The text not only celebrates Mary Magdalene as a spiritual leader, but also presents a more balanced view of spirituality, where the sacred feminine is placed on equal footing with the masculine. This perspective challenges centuries of patriarchal doctrines and offers an opportunity for rebirth for faith. Contemporary spirituality movements have rescued the sacred feminine as a response to the oppressive structures that marginalized women's participation in religion. The Gospel of Philip serves as an inspiration for these efforts by highlighting Mary Magdalene not as a secondary figure, but as a true partner of Jesus in his mission. This message resonates deeply in a world seeking greater inclusion and equality. By bringing to light concepts such as hieros gamos, the Gospel of Philip invites modern Christians to reflect on the integration of the masculine and feminine as a path to spiritual plenitude. This idea, while radical by institutional standards, offers a richer, more holistic approach to faith, promoting a reconnection with the roots of early Christianity. It is a vision that challenges, but also transforms. This rediscovery is not limited to an academic debate. It has practical implications for the renewal of faith communities. Churches and movements that embrace this narrative have the opportunity to rebuild their practices, promoting greater female participation and a less dogmatic spirituality. The Gospel of Philip, therefore, is not just an ancient text, but a powerful tool for the future. The rebirth of the sacred feminine is a call to action, an invitation to revisit the stories that have shaped our spirituality. By exploring the role of Mary Magdalene and the hidden truths of the Gospel of Philip, we are led to question what else can be rediscovered and reimagined at the heart of our faith. After all, the search for the divine is ultimately a journey to find balance and truth. After exploring the intriguing details of the Gospel of Philip, the deepest reflection remains. What do we really know about the relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene? And more importantly, what has been hidden from us by institutional interests? These ancient texts not only challenge what we believe we know, but invite us to question why certain stories were suppressed and others exalted. Imagine what Christianity would be like today if Mary Magdalene's role as a spiritual leader had been recognized from the beginning. How would our faith communities be transformed if they embraced the balance between the masculine and feminine as a reflection of the divine? These questions lead us to a path of discovery that goes beyond fixed doctrines, opening space for a more inclusive and profound Christianity. Now the choice is in your hands. Will you allow yourself to question the narratives presented to you? Will you dare to seek this hidden knowledge and discover a new perspective on spirituality? Perhaps it is time to rediscover the teachings that were on the margins, but that have the potential to illuminate the present and shape the future of faith. If this content sparked your curiosity and inspired new reflections, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue this journey with us. There is much more to explore, question, and perhaps rewrite. After all, the true power of knowledge is in sharing it. Join us on this search for what is hidden in plain sight.